I'm Miles. I got the chance to talk to Jordan Kasarjian, venture capital associate at Inerjys, as well as founder of the sustainable clothing brand Voyageur, about his work. Here's our conversation. What aspect of your work in change making would you say people most widely recognize you for?
My work at Inerjys and Voyageur are the two aspects of my work people recognize the most. It's definitely what I spend most of my time on. I think the similarity between those two is, I guess, a concept of double bottom line business practices, where a business is actually focused on making a return and profiting, but at the same time aware and has values of stewardship, aware of their impacts on the environment. So I think really that's the interest now. I think there is this trend of I guess, well, I'll start before. I think the kind of awareness, activism, and I guess, caring for the environment versus, I guess, kind of normal business practices and, larger corporations kind of making profits was very subdivided. But it's kind of those two worlds are joining, if you will. So I think that's kind of the main trend that those touch on, which interests people.
This concept of the double bottom line, I would love for you to just elaborate on that specific to your experience with it.
The term itself was originally coined by Nancy Fund, who started Double Bottom Line Investors, DBL Partners, rather. But she might have heard that somewhere in academia. I think generally that's kind of the first I'd heard of it in anyone in the investing world doing it. But I'm sure the concept isn't new. I mean, you had kind of indigenous peoples, living more in tune with their surrounding environment and kind of doing their daily business, if you will, with the strong consideration of, the land and environment around them. I think these days it's very exploratory. I think, kind of following a really set path is not as interesting to me as kind of exploring what more can be done in terms of like doing like better DBL or double bottom line business practices.
Right.
So I mean, yeah, there's information out there, but I there's like a robust conversation on like kind of what the best practices are at this point, which is exciting. So
I want to get a sense of if you had to identify with a certain group of people that you represented and that you really kept in mind and worked for or lived for, in a sense, who would be these people in your life that you hold closest to you?
I mean, besides the obvious, like my family and my girlfriend and things like that, I think, kind of more generally, the outdoor urban community, so our outdoorsy urban community. So I think it would be a little bit disingenuous for me to kind of say, oh, I represent this community or that community, but that's not what I am.
Right.
I mean, I grew up in New York City and spent my summers on very remote wilderness canoe trips across Canada, and am doing basically the same thing from Montreal now. And so I think I come from a circle that's actually much more environmentally conscious, and kind of is always thinking about, their impacts, but at the same time is kind of wealthy enough and privileged enough to actually think like that. And so I think that, it's kind of, it's nice for me to pick my battle of kind of climate change ultimately. That's important to me and to, the outdoor community that I'm a part of. But, if we were, growing up in different circumstances, we might not necessarily be able to think about solving those issues and, think about kind of long-term carbon mitigation strategies. Maybe we'd be more focused on, I live by the sea, and there's, the sea level rise is going to flood my area, and I'm more worried about resiliency, or, I'm not anti-GMO because, I can't afford to kind of, eat non-GMO rice that doesn't have kind of, iron enrichment in it or whatever it is. So I think, just, I guess being aware that the battles that I'm worried about and that I feel like I'm representing my community on just kind of long-term climate mitigation and kind of enjoying the outdoors in a more sustainable way, I think is very kind of circumstantial to where we are in the world.
So my next question, I want to get a sense of what your values are that you live by on a day-to-day basis, and what exactly motivates you to live by those values on a day-to-day basis.
I think my two, biggest core values are intellectual rigor and kind of speaking truth to power. And I'm not an activist, like classic kind of political activist or what have you, but I do think that a lot of success is circumstantial, and I think that being really objective and rigorous in thought processes and communicating those directly is really important, just kind of in any interaction or conversation. So I was actually at the embassy in Germany on a sustainability tour the other week, and had no problem kind of rebuking the embassy woman's claims that Canada is only 1% of global emissions, and we're actually doing quite well when Canada's over 3% of global emissions and has the highest per capita emissions of any other nation in the world. I guess to be frank, it's like I didn't really like her approach and her attitude towards saying Canada was doing fine, and if only other countries would kind of step up to the plate. So I had absolutely no problem kind of getting into an argument with her right there in the embassy about how that wasn't true. And I think that kind of attitude allows me to do the type of work I do. In venture capital, you meet with a lot of very successful people and have to basically have a candid discussion on whether a business or idea for a business is good or not, or why a certain financial model is set up the way it should be. And I think being able to kind of cut through the circumstances and cut through maybe doesn't matter who you're talking to and what their title is or how many years of experience they have. Can you have an honest, intellectually rigorous conversation? I think is really important, and especially important, with these discussions around climate change. I mean, you see Greta kind of doing exactly that on the global stage, which is great. So, that's one thing those values are the most important to me.
I want to look ahead with you to see where do you think you'll be this time next year, and more so, what kind of future do you see yourself creating between now and this time in 2020?
I mean, I think between now and by the end of 2020, I think I have some shorter term goals, which are generally doing what I'm doing right now, but just with a higher magnitude. So I mean that basically looks like expanding the operations of Inerjys and Voyageur more at this point. I mean, nothing too interesting to say on that except just kind of execute the path I'm on at this point.
Right, and I guess if you can give me a quick glimpse of like what your day to day would look like.
We'll do everything at Inerjys from meeting with prospective companies who are looking for investment. So I think kind of maintaining an open mind and kind of keeping tabs with my network and kind of all the inbound stuff and keeping an eye on the news and seeing who's doing what in clean tech industries is really important. We're kind of fundraising right now, so making sure that we execute that properly and kind of have we've kind of created a new fund thesis for Canada to kind of decarbonizing mining, oil and gas sectors and provide better energy access, cheaper energy access for kind of off-grid communities. So that's I guess something that we're executing on. I mean, my day-to-day at Inerjys as an associate is essentially sourcing opportunities that kind of fit that thesis. So lots of meetings with entrepreneurs looking for financing, kind of vetting those opportunities as they arise, and kind of doing more rigorous financial due diligence and valuation modeling and kind of deal structuring as well. And then, usually after work, I'll go climbing, probably every other day at this point, walk over to alley up my climbing gym and go climbing, and then basically have the evening to work on Voyageur, which, is really interesting it's just kind of it's a little bit of a break, you could say, from some of the less creative work. I think there's a lot of subjectivity and kind of hopping in Illustrator and choosing how I'm gonna lay out the stitching and designing clothes is just very therapeutic for me. But then also working on the financial models, I guess there's some transferable skills there for my day job. And then, meeting with suppliers and sourcing materials can be, really logistically challenging with so many moving parts. Everything that goes into a jacket, from threads to zippers to main fabric to back of fabric to labels, so it's got its own challenges, but I find it a nice break and kind of therapeutic in a way from what I'm doing kind of day to day. So,
can you elaborate on exactly what the ideal innovative startup team might look like?
One of the easy check marks is we tend to have companies that come to us with some sort of, you could call it intellectual property moat, if you will. So, let's say General Electric wanted to do the same, the same things this small company is doing. How long would it take them and their engineers to kind of, come up with a solution to do the same thing? Would they be able to do that, right?
Right.
And so I think the question of how long and even would they be able to do that is really important for us. So sometimes you'll have someone with a bachelor's degree in maybe electrical engineering who's come up with some interesting, kind of new electrical wiring of a bunch of, battery cells to make a whole system that performs slightly differently, which is fine, and that is a difficult kind of thing to do, but that isn't really the same as, say, someone with a PhD in some very specific field of chemistry who spent their whole life maybe working on with a very specific metal, and then kind of coming up with a new energy storage chemistry based on that metal. That might be something where there are a handful of people in the world who are kind of able to even have a conversation with this person on the kind of things that they're thinking about. So that's really the obvious kind of thing you might look for when you're looking for an innovator, because there might be someone like that first example who kind of came up with something one-off, but doesn't necessarily themselves have that kind of depth of experience to kind of continue to kind of create innovation down the road that other people wouldn't be able to replicate. I almost think of it as like, if your idea is so important, if your idea got out there and anyone else could do it, then maybe that's not as interesting as saying, well, the idea and me are, almost one and the same. It's like, I am executing this, and, not a lot of other people can, is interesting. And then I think just hearing the story of the entrepreneur and like the passion behind what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they, got to the point in life where they're, trying to, start their own company is really important. And if they kind of have the wherewithal, or if they've surrounded themselves with the people with the wherewithal to actually run a business and not just kind of do a science experiment, because there's such a difference there. And the last thing you want is kind of the mad scientist who's looking to raise money and is never going to partner with someone who's filling an important gap in maybe the kind of business acumen side of things. And not to say that everyone should be so even keeled and kind of have skills in all areas, but I think being self-aware in where you're lacking, and being open to kind of relinquishing some control in your business to people who have other skills besides you, and kind of creating a team, not just a one-person team, but having a four-person team in upper management is also really important and shows maturity. So there are all sorts of other things that just besides maybe some mad scientist with a PhD who's able to innovate that are also important when kind of evaluating a management team that we look at.
Within the next 5 years, and if not 5 years, then the furthest out future that you can have a general vision of, are you still at Inerjys, and also what does Voyageur look like within the furthest foreseeable timeline?
Who knows? Maybe I'll be doing Voyageur full time. I think Inerjys definitely would like to stay here as long as I can. It's really exciting place to be. Right now, there's so much sentiment right now around climate change and cleantech investing, and the marginal cost or levelized cost of energy for wind and solar has dipped under gas combined cycle in the last couple of years. So all of a sudden wind and solar are really profitable, and kind of have the capability to lower people's electricity bills, and that's kind of indicative of that's kind of a great signal for the whole double bottom line investing concept. So I think clean tech investing is a great place to be right now, although it hasn't been for so many years. And I think with Voyageur, it's also really exciting because the whole fashion industry is moving in that direction as well. I mean, my plans for Voyageur right now are actually to start doing some winter wear, and I guess kind of adding I have this idea for an offset line with some, I guess, kind of dye sublimated printed parkas, and kind of having I think I'll have a glacier, aerial shot of a glacier from a photographer on one of these, and kind of have it part of the parka margin or price is kind of what's built into that is actually an investment in a energy efficiency or power project in Canada. So offsetting I guess emissions that way. So I think that would be really interesting to execute, just kind of establish that line of things and establish more products in the line, and kind of see where things go.
I just want to know if there's any specific books that you've read that completely that were just pivotal to your career.
I'll answer that in two parts. One is, I guess, Yvon Chouinard's Let My People Go Surfing, and kind of, he's got a couple books around his story, and kind of, he's an amazing example of, deep double bottom line business practices, and, he's had maternity leave since the 70s, and, things like that. Besides his kind of creation of organic cotton and more obvious sustainable practices that I find really interesting. So he's definitely an idol to me. And then I guess looking, I consume a lot of podcasts actually, more than books. So I really like the How I Built This podcast and the Energy Gang podcast and the Interchange, which I guess between the three of those, one would be hearing stories from amazing founders, and then the other two really kind of deep dive energy talk and clean tech talk in general. So that's most of the content I'm consuming these days, and it definitely has a great impact on my life at this point.